An 86% win probability with 14 seconds remaining isn't crazy. We see numerically bigger swings than this on a weekly basis. Even other games in the same week had bigger collapses. NC State choking a 95%er that Thursday, or worse, A&M throwing away an impossible 100% chance to win shortly after their overtime touchdown against Auburn. Further, 39 seconds before this, Rutgers' win probability was actually higher at 93.7%. So why does this 86% matter? Why did it drive me to develop a probability-based formula to determine the worst chokes of the year? Why, even after determining it wasn't one of the worst 50, is it still a thorn in my side? As mentioned, there's only 14 seconds left. To make things more dire, Illinois has 0 timeouts. This 14% is essentially the calculated odds, flags withstanding, of making a 58-yard field goal, getting a first down and stopping the clock, or scoring a touchdown within the 14 seconds remaining. The weather at SHI Stadium on this day sees a crosswind averaging 14 miles per hour into the face of the Illinois players, but shots from the booth and commentary suggest an even more dire situation. Any attempted kick will be a serious challenge. Nonetheless, what makes this choke important is just how predictable it really was. That's primarily due to the characters at play. On the Illinois sideline is Bret Bielema. The 54-year-old has spent 15 years as the head coach of D1 Power 4 programs. He won 3 Big Ten championships while coaching Wisconsin, before taking over the Arkansas job after Bobby Petrino's accident.
Dang it, Bobby!
I'm not super familiar with Bielema's stint at Wisco, but at Arkansas he developed a perfection of the dark arts, an uncanny ability to turn certain defeat into remarkable victory. For example, let's look at one of the most insane 4th and 25 conversions of all time. Quarterback Brandon Allen completes a pass to tight end Hunter Henry, 10 yards short of the sticks. While an Ole Miss defender engages in the game-sealing tackle, Henry throws the ball backwards over his head. After being batted and hitting the ground, Alex Collins snags it and runs for the most unlikely 30 yards you might ever see. Arkansas would go on to win the game over the 18th-ranked Rebels, 53-52, following a touchdown and aggressive 2-point conversion. In Week 2 of 2016, Arkansas would defeat TCU in overtime, eliminating a 99.9% TCU win probability thanks in part to a blocked 28-yard kick. In 2017, Ole Miss would again fall victim when Bielema overcame a 93% win probability. A week later, the same when hosting Coastal Carolina. He's taken some of that dark magic with him to Illinois, where in his first season he shocked number 7 Penn State in Happy Valley after an NCAA record 9 overtimes. And that's not all. This guy was built in a lab to overcome the odds. On the opposite sideline is Greg Schiano. He spent his entire collegiate head coaching career in New Jersey for the Scarlet Knights, where he's often considered a defensive guru. I didn't originally realize how controversial his tenures and legacy have been with the program, but a 2012 Bleacher Report article titled Rutgers Football, Time for Scarlet Nation to Move On from Greg Schiano contains the most damning accusation. It's really hard to imagine the next coach having worse game management skills than Schiano. At midfield, we'll find that Coach Bielema has elected to kick the 58-yarder, likely accepting there will be no dark magic today. The kick sails way wide, but before the champagne pops, an official comes in signaling timeout. Schiano is icing the kicker. Brett uses his mulligan, deciding to go for it on 4th down instead. Coming out of the timeout, surely the defensive guru dials something up to get a stop on 4th and long to win the game. Prior to the snap, Rutgers shows pressure, likely to disrupt offensive line assignments before dropping back into coverage, ultimately giving us the most predictable bad beat of 2024.
Double A gap blitz. They bring the house. Here's the throw. It is a throw. It's caught by Bryant. First down. 15, 10, house call.
In determining the worst chokes of the year, I couldn't just look at a graph and say, well, they had a 95% chance to win, but then they lost, so that score's a 95, totally ignoring time remaining. In essence, I didn't want a team that was losing all game, came back to take a late lead, and then squandered it to be punished as severely as a team that lost after leading all game. I started off by reducing the sample size with the following criteria. The game needed to finish within a 1-score margin, as that's generally more traumatic for fans. To further reduce the data, I ignored any games in which a team never had at least a 75% chance of victory in the second half. A team can absolutely choke without attaining that or having only attained it in the first half, but for ease of use, that was the minimum barrier for consideration. To account for the variability over time, I looked at 5 different moments throughout the game. 4 of them being used to calculate our raw choke score. Roughly halfway through the third quarter, the start of the fourth quarter, halfway through the fourth quarter, and the 2-minute timeout. I use roughly because oftentimes when scrubbing the data, it's hard to land precisely on certain moments mid-play. For reference, just know these values almost always came between the 7 and 8 minute marks of the respective quarter. I also measured the highest win percentage a team had in the second half as a baseline. I calculated a weighted average of the standard values, increasing weights the closer a game was to finishing. After I calculated raw choke score, I reviewed the top chokes based purely on output. The top 25 are graphed here along with the corresponding highest win percentage. I then played with the weights to ensure no games were being exempted due to my somewhat arbitrary data analysis. That is to remind everyone that this obviously isn't a perfect science. Self-critiquing the results, I questioned if this was even viable, as some games scored lower than expected. Like the Week 2 matchup between Arkansas and Oklahoma State, I fully expected that to register in the top 25. Instead, it's barely in the top 70 per RCS. The multiple fumbles, turnover on downs, missed field goal, it is definitely more of a choke than a number of games ahead of it per RCS. You'll also notice the X here, which represents a blank value. If a team had less than a 50% win probability, that means they were projected to lose at that point. As such, I didn't want it contributing to a team's raw score. With all this arbitrary math being thrown around, to finalize my rankings, I had to abandon the numbers a little. While I figured requiring a top 25 RCS was a good baseline, football is all about the intangibles. I reviewed the film, storylines, and everything I could for almost all of the 109 games analyzed. The qualitative analysis is where the real meat is, what makes a mathematically ugly choke a total disaster. Going back to that Rutgers-Illinois game, for example, the boneheaded timeout by Schiano would be a textbook factor that is hard to quantify. And this works in both ways. Sometimes a team doesn't choke as much as their opponents overperform, culminating in the comeback. At the end of the day, the intangibles I craved most were the stories. Games maybe you saw, maybe you didn't, that had a captivating plot beyond just the box score or raw data. Head-scratching coaching decisions, a lack of discipline, historical significance, season or career-long implications, you get the gist. And some games just didn't have enough footage available either. For example, SDSU at CMU really has all the makings of a massive choke by the Aztecs. A 95.2% chance to win at the 2-minute timeout, 2 missed field goals within the closing minutes of the game, loser-coded play calling. Try as I might, I couldn't find good enough tape. Even a game like Clemson's visit to Pitt, in a vacuum not that bad of a single game choke, but more emblematic of a season-long collapse. The Panthers were 7-2 after starting the season 7-0. Twice, the Panthers had 3 consecutive flags called on them, one of those trios occurring at the Clemson 1.
I just cannot possibly explain how bad that operation was.
And then holding Clemson to under 10 yards rushing, all game, before they let Klubnik run in a 50-yard game winner, ending the season 7-6 after choking a bowl game to a MAC team. That's more disgusting than, say, UAB's choke to UConn, which scored higher per RCS. So, lastly, I had to add one additional stipulation before formatting the final list, ensuring that a faceplant was unassisted. A bailout button giving me carte blanche to determine if a game only resulted as a choke due to extenuating circumstances. A faulty probability graph like in UCF at TCU, as upon review the game was a lot closer throughout than the chart indicates. Even though blowing a 3-touchdown third quarter lead is still a choke, it was a 1-score game most of the way through the fourth quarter. Or if a game went to overtime. While there are still a few of those in the top 10, the weights I assigned were correlated to the game ending in the fourth quarter. A game like Georgia Tech at Georgia breaks the scale. And while still worth mentioning, it contains the most important get-out-of-jail-free qualifier, a ref exemption. If the loss occurred as a result of terrible officiating, I needed to account for that. It's no secret college football has an officiating problem. Unfortunately, the win probability analytic can't account for that. A better example is this next game, that would have been third on our list had it not been given a striped parachute. However, a collapse of this caliber doesn't happen purely because of officiating, so we'll observe it as our other honorable mention. Many people remember Miami's visit to Cal for the controversial targeting no call on the Golden Bears' penultimate drive, ultimately the catalyst in their exemption from the top 10. Due to the Pac-12 after-dark nature of this game, many viewers, including myself, didn't tune into the matchup until sometime in the second half. After an insane day of college football that featured 5 of the top 11 teams falling, the Sickos could taste another as Cal extended their lead to 25 midway through the third quarter. Miami is a controversial team on a good day, but a week earlier, another highly contested call gave the Canes a win after a Hail Mary touchdown was overturned. So College Game Day's trip to Berkeley was the perfect recipe for otherwise neutral fans to rally behind Cal. If, like me, you missed the beginning of this game, let's get up to speed. We had some cringe Hall of Fame commentary,
Jaden Ott, O-T-T-T-O-G-O.
And a good call.
My good friend Bill Raftery would describe that call with one word: onions. Jaden Ott.
Cal QB Fernando Mendoza's best Jason impression.
Portals! I wasn't a failed DJ, I was pre-successful.
And a Cam Ward impression of Vikings Brett Favre.
Calmly surveying, throwing back into the middle of the field. Is that dangerous? And it's picked off. Noah Williams has it. He's on his way.
With 5 minutes remaining in the third, Miami picking up this fourth down on their way to score a touchdown via a lengthy 5-minute drive seems almost customary in the "we're going to lose our top 10 ranking, but let's get those style points playbook," and we all know Mario Cristobal loves his style points. Cal would extend their lead back to 20, but in disappointing fashion, as on third down, number 83 drops a pass in the end zone. The fourth quarter of this game, outside of the controversial call, should otherwise be investigated for coaching malpractice. Cal routinely gives up huge third and fourth downs, and even after pinning the Canes inside the 10 with a minute 42 to go, gives up a 77-yard play on the first snap of the drive. Despite that, they'd still force Miami to a 3rd and 20, which they would of course promptly give up. And we all know how this ends, so if there's anything that we should take away from this honorable mention, it should be this. Despite the fact that Justin Wilcox is now 42-50 after 8 seasons in Berkeley, his job security is fine, because the only thing that matters to Cal football is beating Stanford, and he's done that for 4 straight years. 2024's edition being extra special, as Cal flipped the script and turned Stanford into the chokers. After going up by 2 touchdowns, the Trees laid the wood on the ensuing kickoff, forcing a fumble and getting the ball in prime position to go up 3 scores. But as misery loves company, they'd botched the snap on the field goal that would have made it 24-7, only to lose 24-21. This game was almost too good to find itself on the list. The first few times I reviewed it, the tape seemed too miraculous to be considered a choke, more than it was an epic comeback. But once I dove into the details, this game has an incredible storyline. First-year Buffalo head coach Pete Lembo actually spent 4 years as the head coach of Ball State. While he coached the Cardinals, he set 60 program records and led them to some of their most success in program history. He left for an assistant job at the University of Maryland, where it was rumored his departure was somewhat due to the lack of funding for the program, contributing to back-to-back losing seasons. Lembo, known for his special teams, spent a few years bouncing around as a coordinator before he became a broiler semifinalist under Shane Beamer at South Carolina, leading to his new role in Buffalo. Ball State head coach Mike New was hired in 2016 to replace Lembo, and he's here today with the opportunity to play his predecessor. I'd say his tenure in Muncie hasn't been good, but I wouldn't want to be accused of glazing, as in 8 years he's achieved just a single winning season. And not to pull the Mickey Mouse card, but it was during 2020's COVID-shortened schedule. That shouldn't take away from the accomplishment though, as New Squad did win the MAC championship and end the season ranked. But fast forward to summer 2024, and gamers are using you to prove they can turn any program into a dynasty. So yeah. New's long leash with the Cardinals is likely due to the fact he's in the Ball State Athletics Hall of Fame. He quarterbacked the program to the 1993 MAC championship. Tonight, the star-crossed coaches exchanged body blows for 3 quarters before the Cardinals seemed to deliver the knockout punch, scoring 17 unanswered to take a 14-point lead. The field goal to cap off this run pushed Ball State's win probability above 97%. With just over 7 minutes to go, it looked like Mike New was going to get a decisive victory over the man he was hired to replace. The ensuing Buffalo drive sees them march inside the 30, and facing 4th and 10 with nothing open, Ogbonna's desperation scramble is uncontested to the end zone. Oddly enough, the special teams expert looks on as his team first takes a delay of game before a botch snap and hold keep the deficit at 8. It might surprise you that Ball State doesn't immediately go 3 and out, avoiding the cardinal sin of choking. They pick up a first down, but wildly elect to throw 2 straight passes on 2nd and 3rd down to keep the clock stopped and give Buffalo 3.5 minutes to work with. After a fairly called PI advances the ball, Buffalo once again faces 4th and the game after Ogbonna misses a wide open receiver across the field, and the most controversial call of the game keeps the drive alive. 2 plays later, the Bulls again earn a first down on a flagged Cardinal, gaining 35 yards now solely due to penalties. Some games were exempted from the list due to bad officiating, right? But when you're actually committing the head-scratching penalties, it just amplifies the choke. Coming out of the 2-minute timeout, Buffalo heaves a 2nd down prayer to JJ Jenkins, who makes an insane catch. You might accuse Buffalo of scoring too quickly here, but they do still need this 2-point conversion. I'd argue Pete Lembo wanted this much time. Giving themselves a buffer if they fail to score, with 3 timeouts remaining, they can still try and steal the ball back. That doesn't matter though, as an Andy Reid special brings us all square. For Ball State, now they've got a minute 45 and 3 timeouts with a chance to ice the game. They march into Buffalo territory and aggressively run the ball on 4th down to keep the drive alive and get just a few yards from the field goal target line. With 1 timeout and 31 seconds, the target line of 38 would put an attempt at 55 yards or so, which is a bit further than their kicker's career long, but he's 2 for 2 on the year from 50 plus, so it's once again inexplicable why Ball State elects to throw 2 passes deep downfield. And the booth agrees.
I don't know why you throw 2 balls down the field there if you're Ball State. You're 5 yards away from being in pretty good field goal range to kick the field goal to win the game. They take 2 shots down the field. Now they got to keep their offense on the field.
A sad 4th down pooch punt gets us to Buffalo having the ball with 13 seconds. Buffalo fans familiar with the local NFL team know all too well what can happen in 13 seconds. However, instead of chasing Mahomes, Lembo wisely takes the game to OT. Ball State gets the first possession and calls a halfback pass that sniffed out, a check down, and a QB run before now electing to take the safe field goal. An admittedly impressive and predictable Buffalo touchdown ends the game in walk-off fashion. But sometimes chokes have consequences, and 4 days later, Ball State announces that Mike New has been relieved of his duties. Losing in humiliating fashion to the man that opened the door for the alumni's reunion proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back, ending the former Ball State QB's tenure in Muncie with an underwhelming 40-63 record. You can argue that losses matter more than wins in college football. When Baylor visits Boulder in late September, both teams are already feeling the pressure of that possible reality. Baylor suffered a loss 2 weeks earlier to a highly touted Utah team led by 12th-year starter Cam Rising. A lot of teams take early trips cross-country for out-of-conference games, but this was Baylor's second trip out west in 3 weeks as part of the welcoming committee for the Big 12. As we already saw with our Cal dishonorable mention, sometimes you can take the team out of the Pac-12, but the Pac-12 after dark lives forever. However, Colorado is no stranger to the Big 12. They were a founding member with the Bears back in 1994. They left in 2011 when the Pac offered a more favorable revenue sharing model. Further inquiry cites one common theme: the Texas Longhorns. Whether Colorado left because of the financial stranglehold or because they feared those schools leaving and didn't want to be stuck holding the bag, the Pac became home for over a decade. Not that it was very cozy, as in 13 seasons they only had a winning record once. It's perfect timing. UT and OU were on their way out when the Big 12 offered a $2.5 million signing bonus, reportedly the only new member to receive incentive compensation. As Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark put it, "One got us 4." It's convenient that head coach Deion Sanders was anointed just 6 months before the reunion. Piloting the Buffs' final year in the Pac-12 was mostly underwhelming, except in Week 1, when Colorado shocked the reigning national runner-up, TCU, a member Big 12 school. Colorado's 2024 isn't off to a prime start either, though, where in Week 2 they got dismantled by Patrick Mahomes impersonator Dylan Raiola and arguably their biggest rival, Nebraska. So both teams come into this game desperately seeking momentum. A crowd-silencing 100-yard kickoff return and aggressive 4th down QB draw going for 45 yards Colorado's Big 12 baptism had them on the ropes, down 24-10. Now, what we're about to witness combines one of my favorite instances in football with one that I despise. Shador's Houdini act keeps this third down alive. His pass is caught by Omarion Miller. It is his first catch of the entire season. When we freeze the play at this point, we'd think there is no chance the Bears don't bring him down outside the 30. And we'd be wrong, because Miller makes the most of his first opportunity and levitates before dusting his opponents on the way to the end zone. This would keep the game close, and following a brief punt fest, Colorado would tie it up on the back of a Heisman-esque takeover, accounting for 77 of the drive's 85 yards. Baylor would then wake up after being shut out for nearly 2 full quarters, with a one-handed catch pulling them back ahead. At this point, as a viewer, I'd be asking, so where's the choke? I've seen the ending, but it just seems back and forth so far. And that'd be fair, but at this point Baylor's attained a 94% win probability. The Bears get back-to-back sacks, and what could have been intentional grounding resulting in a safety goes uncalled. I'm not an expert on the pocket, but it's close nonetheless. Now it's time to get choky. Baylor returns the punt to the Colorado 26, already in field goal range. Their kicker hit from 51 last week, but he's missed a few in the 40 range, including one at Utah and another last week from 44. Baylor's offense, doing nothing to make it easier, results in a stadium pulse that sends this kick into Boulder Creek. Colorado gets the ball back with 2:16 remaining, meaning the clock shouldn't be an issue. Touchdown scoring drives today have averaged less than 3 minutes in length, and that's not including the kickoff return. The major outlier actually being Colorado's second drive of the day, having been 11 plays spanning over 6 minutes. Their Heisman winner being banged up definitely doesn't help, nor does the offensive line giving up more sacks. After narrowly escaping disaster, a false start runs the clock down even further. When Wester catches the ball with 39 seconds remaining, confusion causes chaos. Colorado doesn't get another snap off until 17 seconds evaporate. In the confusion, Prime is forced to use his final timeout. Now just 18 unstoppable seconds separate Colorado from losing their Big 12 reintroduction game. More pressure, incomplete pass. More pressure, and Shepard drops a walk-in touchdown. Baylor calls timeout to set up their Hail Mary defense. I like Dave Aranda, he is a Mike Leach disciple, but blitzing 5 on a Hail Mary with 7 defenders at or near the line of scrimmage, you're inviting disaster. And that's what happens with Wester's Hail Mary grab. Football's equivalent of a half-court buzzer beater or grand slam with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th, and we've already learned what happens when a team with a high win probability goes to overtime. In what has apparently become a bit of a Big 12 tradition, Colorado fans storm the field before officials confirm the ruling. But at least in this case, the game was actually over. Some schools own the privilege of having more than one visceral rivalry, while others are left on such an island they sell merch claiming themselves unrivaled. Rivalries come and go all the time, and sometimes we only get the privilege of enjoying them if the schools agree on a home-and-home series, or meet each other in postseason play. Other times we're subjected to forced trophy games that barely hold a candle to the real deal. While the Big East has renewed its legacy in the basketball world, the conference ceased to exist for its football programs in 2013, following most of its members leaving for greener pastures. With the death of the conference, so went a number of its established rivalries. Some of the more notable games, such as the Backyard Brawl, survived with the schools agreeing to schedule each other well into the future. Another one of Pitt's Big East foes was Cincinnati in the River City rivalry. Initially brought on as one of those trophy games, the outcome of their games and circumstances surrounding them turned the casual yearly meeting more sour. In 2007, a second-half shutout gave Shady McCoy's Panthers a 24-17 win. In 2008, though, a ranked matchup would give the Bearcats their first win as Big East rivals, a game that saw Cincinnati escape with a 28-21 victory after being up 28-7 in the fourth quarter. The 2009 matchup between Brian Kelly's number 5 Cincy and number 15 Pitt for the Big East Conference title and a BCS bowl berth was an ESPN instant classic. Pitt raced out to a 31-10 lead in the first half, but after a kickoff return touchdown for the Bearcats, all hell broke loose, leading to a historic moment in Bearcat football history, resulting in a 45-44 victory, ending the most high-stakes matchup the rivalry has seen to date. Pitt would get one back the following year in a snow game where the Bearcat got arrested for throwing snowballs at opposing players, but after Cincinnati won in 2011 and 2012, the series would end with the Bearcats evening the score in the Big East at 4-4. While owning 4 of the last 5 paddle wheel trophies. After a decade of hiatus, the schools would finally meet again in 2023 as the first part of a home-and-home. a game that eerily resembled Cincinnati's 2008 win as they held on 27-21 after having a 27-7 lead in the fourth quarter. The game last year was dominated by former Mr. Ohio winner Corey Kiner, who put up 153 yards and a score on 20 carries. When Kiner gets the Bearcats to the red zone with less than 2 minutes in the first half, it seems we're on the verge of Cincinnati taking a commanding 3-score lead into the break. Expert clock manager Pat Narduzzi doesn't even bother using his timeouts, letting the Bearcats burn the clock under 35 seconds with 2 timeouts in his back pocket. With the clock stopped and the Bearcats facing third down, he actually elects to use it now, indicating he has no real expectation of scoring before halftime. If I was a Pitt fan, I'd be irate. At the very least, coming out of the timeout, Pitt does force a stop and short field goal attempt. I feel bad continually dragging kickers in this series, but when you miss a 25-yarder, I really have no choice. Not his fault the laces worn out, but my word does this make some of College Game Day's attempts look solid. Pitt takes over and only completes passes to the middle of the field. This strategy wouldn't have worked except that they were bailed out by an injured Bearcat player, resulting in a forced Cincinnati timeout with 1 second, leading to a 53-yard bomb from their senior kicker. Instead of taking a 3-score lead into the break, it's now just an 11-point advantage for the Bearcats. The script stays pretty much the same after half, and the announcers resort to talking about other games.
In Arkansas getting the job done in Stillwater?
About that. Anyway, another overthrow allows our maligned kicker to redeem himself and earn a 21-point lead most of the way through the third quarter. Pitt's tempo results in a lightning-fast response, where on 3rd and goal from the 12, Mumfield runs an insane route that leaves the defender completely lost. Our win probability analytic isn't going to be scared by one score though. It remembers what happened in 2008 and just last year. A quick check-in with Scott Satterfield before the fourth quarter gives us an all-time coaching cliche.
And Corey Kiner's running hard in the run game.
How do you close it out in the fourth?
Well, we got to go score a touchdown.
And Scott, hindsight's 20/20, but the blueprint is right in front of you. Cincinnati is having their way on the ground. The man that set a career high against the Panthers last year is on pace to do it again. With a full quarter to play, Corey Kiner has 106 yards on 17 carries. It makes sense with a 2-score lead to focus on controlling the tempo of the game and using slow, methodical drives to get out with a 4th straight win in the River City rivalry and their 6th in the last 7 meetings. My advice? Keep pounding Kiner. And to open the fourth, they do, a 26-yarder from Kiner getting the team to midfield. Now he's averaging 7 yards a carry. No reason not to go back to the well. Instead, they elect to throw 3 straight incompletions, one that could have easily resulted in an ugly fumble on a Bosch reverse pass. To add salt to the wound, you have a color commentator like Sam Acho.
Give it to Kiner, hand the ball off, let the clock run, bleed it out, but win the game that way.
Western Carolina transfer Desmond Reed is putting up similar numbers for Pitt. But Narduzzi isn't refusing to use him. The Bearcats commit the cardinal sin of allowing a 4th down play at midfield to go for a touchdown. Momentum hangs in the balance as Narduzzi uses analytics to keep the difference at 8 instead of taking the PAT. Maybe Pitt is scared by 2009, but who am I to judge? Scott Satterfield, in all his wisdom, forces me to once again agree with Acho as he runs backup running back Chance Williams instead.
Get back to Corey Kiner, get back to the run game.
In a move that is nothing less than unacceptable, Scott refuses to give his star running back a carry and has to punt the ball back to Pitt. Narduzzi, maybe feeling blessed that his defense didn't have to stop Kiner, goes back to his workhorse. The Bearcats only maintain the lead thanks to analytics failing the Panthers. Maybe the staple of this rivalry is just Pitt failing to pull off the major comeback. Maybe in a ruthless way, this is how Cincinnati sticks it to Pittsburgh. The entire second half is littered with the stadium mic picking up "Eat shit Pitt" chants. Even after the most recent Pitt touchdown, maybe the students just want it this way. Needing a drive to ice the game, they finally go back to Kiner and he gets 8 yards. They go back to him again and there's another 9. So Scott, I really need to know why he stays on the sidelines for the next 2 plays, even when you're calling runs. Kiner stays on the sidelines and naturally they don't convert. Punt the ball back. And I bet they're starting to wish they made that field goal at the end of the half. As fate would have it, they would actually force a 4th and 4 that Pitt has to go for. Once again, Acho absolutely knows what he's talking about today when he recognizes Narduzzi keeping his star player on the sideline for arguably their biggest play of the season thus far.
Where's Des Reed? That's my question.
Sounds like a great time for a delay of game on the defense. Very generous of you, Scott. It would be really unfair to beat a team without their best players on the field, And if you really want to twist the knife, you have to keep Pitt around thinking they have a chance.
And the best teams I've been on, Taylor, to your point, we've practiced 2 minutes. We put a focus on it because usually most games come down to the last 2 minutes.
There's the obvious Acho we know and love. On cue, Pitt's 34-yard strike puts them in comfortable field goal range. I can't tell if Narduzzi is actually managing the clock well or not because it looks like he's content just ensuring the last play of the game is his team's field goal attempt. But then he calls a timeout with 23 seconds remaining, and you really have to question if they care about the integrity of the sport. I mean, they come out of the timeout and just run the ball on 3rd down to set up the kick, but alas, Pitt will take their first lead off the leg of Ben Sauls. Obviously, there is no Ohio happy ending here, so the expert analysis will take us home.
And that will do it. The comeback is complete.
They gave the ball to their best player. Give the ball to Des Reed, and everything else happens.
Actually, Narduzzi wanted to have the last word. You know, because rivalries.
You know, you guys can talk about the River City rivalry. We all know that's not really a rivalry.
Based strictly on the math, this game wouldn't have made the top 10. Ironically, it was actually just off the list. One of the first games out, you might say. If we compare the win probability graph to those of the previously ranked games, it's not remotely as dramatic. The thing about math is that it can be misleading. Just ask any former Enron investors. This coach has a thing about being left out though, so I figured I'd indulge him by ensuring he and his team get their fair share of the limelight. I hope this chapter proves that this coach is more than deserving of having his story told. Lane Kiffin has made a career out of being easy to hate. It's almost admirable how fortunate he's been in utilizing disdain to catapult himself into the upper echelon of coaching. He is a perfect example that all publicity is good publicity, and it's certainly helped his program become a top target of corporate NIL sponsorships. While true valuations are hard to verify, a November 2024 article by ESPN's Chris Lowe asserts the Rebels spent around $13 million on their 2024 roster. It's no secret that Kiffin is a big fan of spending money to land top targets, notably transfers. Raiding the Grove coffers resulted in Ole Miss landing the highest-ranked transfer class during the 2024 portal cycle, with many of the top recruits having played on rival SEC rosters the season before, including but not limited to guys like Walter Nolan, Chris Paul Jr., and Juice Wells. They did lose Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State, but were fortunate in seeing only one of their exits land at an SEC competitor. However, hating Lane Kiffin didn't become trendy out of nowhere. He'd been pissing people off far before RageBait became the mainstream. While many of his actions in 2023 and 24 kept the vitriol highbrow, a Reddit post from 11 years ago asked the forum why Kiffin is so widely disliked. Of the 144 comments, only a handful even attempt to defend the coach. Now, when I originally scripted this section, I found out a lot more about Lane than I could have ever asked for. On top of that, there seemed to be a substantial lack of YouTube content regarding Kiffin's storied past. At the very least, something that pulled it all together. So when it was all said and done, this chapter that's supposed to discuss a choke turned more into a full expose covering Kiffin's entire career. For the sake of time, I've dramatically reduced the content in this section. I may release a full Kiffin video essay with the fun and smooth transitions at some point in the future, but for now, here is the rapid-fire spark notes. Lane is the son of legendary NFL defensive coordinator Monty Kiffin, often considered the father of the Tampa 2 defense, but apparently that's a lie. Monty goes way back with Pete Carroll, someone he saw as a mentor. That got Kiffin the job with the Trojans in Southern California, as Carroll was repaying Kiffin by hiring his son. And he kept going. Lane would be mentored all the way to the OC position. He wouldn't be as successful as his predecessor, Norm Chow, but we'll shelve that for now. 2 years into being OC on a team that won back-to-back natties before his arrival, he'd be hired by the Oakland Raiders as the youngest head coach in NFL history. It didn't last long. Al Davis fired him in an infamous projector press conference, calling Kiffin a flat-out liar and disgrace to the organization. Davis references Monty and Carroll as bad influences, which of course is incredibly ironic today. And we learn if Kiffin leaves after being head coach, you're doomed for failure. At least so far. Oakland hasn't won a playoff game since. He would then become the youngest head coach in D1 FBS for the Volunteers, where he'd go 7-6 in his first year, but be remembered more for his off-the-field stunts, like accusing Urban Meyer of cheating, and telling Alshon Jeffrey he'd pump gas for a living if he went to South Carolina. Spoiler, Alshon did okay for himself with the Gamecocks. Carroll left Southern Cal for the Seattle Seahawks and claims he definitely, most certainly did not leave because of the impending NCAA sanctions. So, Someone would have to lead the Trojans through that period, and voila, Lane Kiffin would be hired one day after Pete's departure, which is not suspicious at all. Adios Knoxville, I'm sure that'll go over well. The Vols have yet to return to the SEC championship game since his departure. He did pretty well in light of the circumstances, and when later asked, he'd say his ego made him an asshole before doubling down and saying, people will hate you for being a football coach and having a hot wife. Spoiler 2, that wife would go on to divorce him. He'd get kicked off the USA Today coaches poll for lying and then having a piss poor season. Then he'd give us new recess vernacular, like when someone makes a great catch on the playground and you say Most, or shooting paper in a trash can and saying Kobe, or your friend gaining weight after graduating college so you say he's in his Kelvin Benjamin era. Kiffin, of all people, would be the catalyst for the word tarmac after he was fired on the tarmac, actually an office that was tarmac adjacent, but semantics, and our story welcomes in world-renowned agent Jimmy Sexton. Sexton would unite Kiffin with Saban, as Old Nick had a thing for revitalizing careers. They'd do well on the field, but not behind closed doors. Kiffin would be fired before their 2016 championship game against Clemson, in part because he was already hired to take over at FAU, where he would win back-to-back CUSA titles and sign a 10-year extension that lasted just long enough to finish that second year before he jumped to Ole Miss to take over for Matt Luke after the Rebels were trying to advance past the Hugh Freeze era being escorted out. Saban would be quoted as saying, "I'm going to fire you, Jimmy, for ever talking me into hiring that narcissistic," bringing us to today, where expectations are high and Ole Miss is rolling except for an ugly home loss to what will be the worst team in the conference this year. But hey, you can still make the playoffs with an ugly loss. Just ask the Irish. So, let's dive into his matchup against another controversial SEC head coach in Brian Kelly. The game starts off pretty slow, but in large part due to Ole Miss's inability to capitalize on their opportunities, their second drive spanning 5 minutes just to miss a short field goal. Though, right after, Garrett Nussmeier would offer up a gift to give the Rebels the ball inside the LSU 15. Kiffin would call 4 straight Henry Parrish Jr. runs to turn the ball over on downs. Skipping forward, just before halftime, a fumble would give LSU the ball in Ole Miss territory to squeak out another field goal before the break. Those moments before halftime, always so important. The Rebs would still go into the break with a 4-point lead, and after the half, they would inch along to a 22-16 lead. Ole Miss was putting together a drive that looked to extend the lead, but Dart throws one of the most questionable Hail Mary-esque passes on 1st and 25 inside the 40. I'm a big fan of arm punts, but those are usually reserved for third down and not inside opponent's territory. It didn't matter though, as Nussmeier immediately returned the favor. So now Ole Miss has an opportunity to put together a good drive that seals the game. The previous drive before the interception took 5 minutes. It even had an aggressive 4th and 2 shot play. That long scoreless drive had runs though, so this time Kiffin goes to 3 passes, no completions, punting the ball right back to LSU while only using up 50 seconds. I understand not wanting to be super conservative while playing with the lead. I think it's a fatal flaw of many coaches who find themselves ahead in games against superior competition. Sometimes it works, sometimes it backfires tremendously. They'd once again force LSU to punt and would cash in their next drive for points, primarily thanks to Jackson Dart's legs. At this point, Rebels leading receiver Trey Harris is out for the game. You'd expect South Carolina transfer Juice Wells to step up and play a big role, but he's been held to 0 receptions at this point. Instead, it's sophomore Caden Lee that's becoming Dart's go-to target. LSU needs a touchdown with time running out, so they're forced to go for it when Ole Miss forces a 4th and 7. This time, Nuss converts. 3 plays later, the Rebels have another chance to effectively end things with a long sack, but Cajun Voodoo keeps Nuss up to deliver a huge catch. They get lucky that Taylor's elbow hits, otherwise this would have been a house call. The defense forces another 4th down, this time with only 32 seconds remaining, but a perfect throw ties the game. On to overtime. A holding call on the first play of the extra period backs the Rebs up, and Juice Wells fails to adjust to the first deep shot. The next 2 passes are both nearly intercepted, forcing Lane to send in his kicker for a career long. The massive boot proves futile as 1 play later LSU ends the game. Obviously, this second loss wouldn't be the sole reason Ole Miss was on the outside looking in. They'd go on to lose another game against an unranked albeit impressive Florida team that poetically also took down LSU. Another game the Rebels entered as double-digit favorites in. This wouldn't stop Lane from taking to X and sparking college football's very own Cold War. He really cemented his legacy by stomping his feet and acting like a toddler when his team was kept out. And while I want to refrain from discussing the merit of his argument, there is obviously no need. One of the things that came about as a result is this sense of conference pride. SEC this, Big Ten that. This strange paradigm shift where fans have started rooting for their conference rivals over out-of-conference strangers because it somehow validates their own team. If you ask me, I think it's all pretty disgusting. Not to pull a Nickelback, but look at that graph. It's beautiful. It's like the natural beauty you find scattered throughout the United States, but particularly in the American West, home to some of the most fascinating landscapes you might find around the world. States like Utah and Washington are blessed to be surrounded by a plethora of national parks that attract tourists from every corner of the globe. The sprawling size doesn't take away from the region's ability to produce major universities. Unfortunately, for some of our most notable schools out west, the aforementioned conference realignment left some of the former Pac-12 marooned as independents. Some of the background here also didn't make the final cut. At this point, everyone should know the impact money plays on the sport of college football. So instead of this deep dive, we will jump into the more recent background for Washington State in particular. The Cougars, like the terrifying sleeping giant of the Cascadia subduction zone, exist within waves. Wazoo is one of those programs that peaks and valleys almost cyclically. If you graph their yearly win total dating back to 1968 when they joint founded the Pac-8, it almost looks like one half of a seismograph detecting energy. Brief spikes followed by periods of dormancy. The recent Mike Leach era resulted in the largest sustained tremor, where from 2015 to 2018, the Cougars won 37 games, the most during a 4-season stretch in program history. When the Pirate was poached by Mississippi State, his initial successor would be just as goofy. However, his goofy wasn't as entertaining and didn't align with the university's core values, to put it plainly. In an area of the country that handled COVID with the utmost caution, Nick Rolovich opted against receiving a vaccine. After this caused negative publicity for WSU, they were able to fire him in the middle of the 2021 season, citing a violation of the state's vaccine mandate. While the pokey needle issue was front and center, it's probably safe to assume the school and coach had more than one irreconcilable difference. In the interim, they elevated Jake Dickert, a coach that Rolovich hired in 2020 from Wyoming to be his defensive coordinator. After Dickert led the team to a 40-13 win over in-state rival Washington, Jakey D was given the reins full-time. The Apple Cup means a lot to Wazoo and the city of Pullman. They don't win it that often either. Even Mike Leach didn't get it done a single time during his run from 2015 to 2018. So taking home the first Apple Cup trophy in 8 years was all he needed to do to earn that chance. The first 2 full seasons under Coach Dickert were nothing short of average, notching a record of 12-13 that included 0 additional Apple Cups, but 2 wins over ranked Wisconsin teams, so at least Cam Ward's talents weren't totally wasted. That's right. How could I forget? You're probably familiar with Cam Ward, who transferred from Incarnate Word to Washington State to be Dickert's first true quarterback. As many of you know, Cam Ward would be the most noteworthy departure from WSU after the collapse of the Pac-12, going over 3,000 miles from Pullman to the opposite corner of the United States at Miami. It's a shame they couldn't do more with Ward on the team. The ACC Player of the Year will in all likelihood be the first overall pick. A fascinating tangent is the volume Cam Ward threw for during his time in college. Let's compare him to 2023 first-round draft pick Anthony Richardson. During his 3 seasons at Florida, Anthony Richardson attempted 393 passes with another 161 rushing attempts as he averaged over 6 yards a pop. For the purpose of this analysis, that means by the time he was drafted, AR had taken 554 snaps where he would be responsible for the outcome of the play. Including stats from all 3 of Ward's collegiate stops, he attempted 2,329 passes with 402 rushing attempts for a monstrous 2,731 snaps commanding the offense. That's nearly 5 times as many opportunities. Wild. Anywho, Ward is gone now. Taking over for Ward would be John Mateer, the sneaky athletic sophomore from Texas. Coming into this season, the Cougars' expectations would be a mixed bag, as they weren't considered a top 50 team but had a Vegas win total line of 7.5. The moderately high line was likely a result of their rather weak strength of schedule that would rank 106 out of 134 by the end of the season. And WSU took advantage of their lackluster competition by starting the season 4-0, including a victory in the September edition of the Apple Cup. This was the exact thing Dickert and his team needed to surge, and earn real investment from the fanbase. I'm sure it was weird for fans of both schools to watch this game in September. It's supposed to be their Thanksgiving weekend rivalry game, a staple alongside other major trophy games like the Iron and Egg Bowls or the Game. But like many, they couldn't stop Ashton Jeanty in Week 5, where the Heisman runner-up accounted for 259 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns en route to a 45-24 stomping. They'd immediately rebound though. rattling off another 4 straight wins before they visited New Mexico on November 16th. They even found themselves ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee. This was incredible. As mentioned, they came into the season with no certain expectations. Now they had an outside chance at getting into the College Football Playoff. Their chances slim as a one-loss independent, but not impossible. In their first year of the Pac-2, DivKid could do the unthinkable. Come December, there will definitely be worse arguments to qualify for the playoff than we won on every naturally covered turf we played on. Regardless of what the committee would do, the 3 opponents standing in the way of just their second 11-win season in program history were a combined 10-19. At halftime against New Mexico, the Cougs are rolling, 28-14, just as expected. We'll check back in later and... oh, you can't do that. You cannot lose to New Mexico and not with an 89% chance of victory with 3 minutes remaining. Terrible. The Cougs have a chance to retain their status headed to Corvallis. DivKid even does a good job stoking the flames of what is sure to become a de facto rivalry by saying, "I've never gotten into they're our buddy. Oregon State is not our buddy. They would have left us as fast as we would have left them." In a landscape where coaches so often bite their tongues and whisper sweet nothings, DivKid lays down some real bulletin board material as a double-digit favorite. The Beavers give us their best shot, but midway through the fourth quarter we rebounded, back up to a 92.5% chance of victory with... not again. Double-digit favorites in back-to-back weeks. It's like some sort of sick joke. Any chances of making the college football playoff have now completely vanished. For those keeping track at home, these chokes both register in the top 60. They in fact both have a raw choke score above 3.75. This sort of disgusting act is a company that they share with just 2 other schools. Of the approximately 1,608 games played in the 2024 regular season, only our friends in Pittsburgh and our friends in Southern California will also commit the utterly inhumane act of submitting their loving fans to a choke in back-to-back weeks. It's almost unimaginable. At the very least, the Trojans did it in 3 straight weeks, so at least we can try to avoid that. As Butch returns to Pullman, tail between his legs, all that's left to do is beat the team that DivKid was hired from, Wyoming, and finish the season 9-3. Wyoming is having a bad year. After 10 years of Craig Bowl that culminated in their best season since 1996, the books thought Jay Sovil taking over would yield at least 500 results. The books were wrong. Through 11 games, they've only managed 2 wins, and not against very impressive teams either. Just Air Force and, New Mexico. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to motivate a team in those circumstances. The Cowboys season effectively ended weeks ago. Just last week, their opportunity to make a huge splash, maybe play spoiler and upset Boise State, fell just short. They can't look at Washington State like a similar opportunity, as the Cougs' 2-game skid has seen them drop from the rankings completely. This weekend would normally be the Apple Cup though, so at least it's fitting WSU is hosting a UW school to end the season. The first quarter goes pretty much just as expected. WSU scores a touchdown on their second drive, and opens the second quarter with another 7. The teams trade punts, and a 9-second drive ending in a Wyoming pick gives Wazoo the ball with about 3 minutes until the half. A balanced drive gets them on the brink of field goal range, but Mateer wildly extends his arm, resulting in a fumble and turnover, saving the Cowboys from what would have been a 2-touchdown lead at the break. In an effort to waste none of their 42 seconds, Wyoming gets the ball down to the Cougs' 5 before settling for 3 as the half expires. Old Crimson waves as punts are traded prior to Wyoming settling in for a 6-minute, 14-play drive that only comes up with another 3 points. WSU wastes less than a minute in punting them the ball right back, which is bizarre if we're putting it lightly. Coming into today, DivKid's offense has averaged over 35 points per game, and that's excluding the 70 points they dropped on FCS school Portland State. Wyoming's defense may have just held G&T and the Broncos to 17. In all of their FBS games, they've allowed over 30 points per game. Washington State going 3-and-out for a third time is almost unbelievable. We're almost at the end of the third quarter, and the team that was 18.5-point favorites has only put up 14 points. Wyoming puts together another lengthy drive into Wazoo territory, but a 3rd-and-long sack fumble gives Mateer and Co. the ball to Wyoming 45. They just need about 10 yards to get into kicking range and potentially extend the lead to 8 on the gift. Instead, they follow up an incomplete pass with 3 straight runs. The drive ends a yard short. And DivKid is being totally nerfed by the defense he used to coach. Maybe he recruited some of those Cowboys before he left and they want to validate his interest. Regardless, it's a good thing he's a defensive coach, because when Wyoming once again crosses into WSU territory, another forced fumble puts the ball back in WSU's hands with under 6.5 to go. our win probability is creeping back towards 90%. Wayshawn Parker picks up a quick first down, meaning that this series is technically a 4-and-out, or however you want to scrutinize another abysmal offensive series from Washington State. On a drive-by-drive basis, this second half is statistically their worst of the season. I compiled every drive result of WSU throughout the year against FBS competition, that is excluding the 70 points they dropped on Portland State. I left out any one-play end-of-half kneel downs for cleaner data. The 4 ends here are longer drives and often intentional. On average, they've scored points on almost 50% of their drives, and the only reason they haven't is due to a few missed field goals. Extremely impressive. They tend to score more touchdowns in the first half, but have yet to be held scoreless in any half of football this season, including the blowout loss to Boise State. Of the 69.4 plays they average a game, 32 of them come in the second half. Tonight in Pullman, they've only managed to get off 20 snaps as we near the end of the game. Whatever happened at halftime, this team is playing hexed. One thing not included in CW broadcasting agreements is having high-quality game highlights posted around for the world to see just how a choke came to be. I have a similar grievance with CBS Sports. That said, Wyoming, still down 5, uses 98 seconds on just 3 plays. Coming out of the 2-minute timeout, they're forced to go for it on 4th and 1 from their own 19. This time, Swoboda doesn't fumble and the Cowboys have a first down. Still 79 yards to cover and barely over 100 seconds to do so. A second down face mask becomes the biggest play of the drive so far and moves Wyoming to their own 39. Swoboda is sacked before firing off an ambitious throw to the out route at the sticks that is somehow not intercepted but caught by Chris Durr. The 3-minute highlight tape thrown together by the CW fancies it so impressive the catch is one of the only plays that we get a second look at. I will say Ryan Leaf, yes, that Ryan Leaf, former Cougar himself, does excellently complement the execution of the play, even performed against his former team. I wish I was joking, but just like you, Wyoming calls 4 verts. WSU's 2 high safeties don't commit, and first down. With a minute to go, the Cowboys get called for an extremely questionable chop block, creating a 1st and 25. Another simple streak is apparently too complicated for DivKid's scheme, and the penalty yardage is negated immediately. Something about coaching. Swoboda isn't done being aggressive yet, and the ensuing first down play goes right through the hands of a Wazoo corner. Additional commentary comes in aggressively criticizing the DB for not staying high enough in his zone.
If I am the defensive back or linebackers coach, I'd be losing my mind right now.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't, I say. They just got beat twice for 49 yards by not being close enough to the receivers to disrupt their routes. But yeah, the field has shrunk substantially, meaning there's less space to get beat underneath. Had this ball been thrown in a remotely catchable area, it's safe to assume it would have been picked off. Swoboda then throws a questionable checkdown that loses 4 yards and costs the Cowboys their final timeout. Coming out of the stoppage, they face 3rd and 14 with 35 seconds. They get single coverage on Durr, the receiver that made the insane catch earlier, but Wyoming is receiving no love from the officials as the refs keep the laundry in their pocket despite the defender being draped all over him. Even the announcer suggests they would have expected a flag. 4th and 14.
I would argue the official probably should have thrown a flag there.
Jakey D calls timeout. The former Wyoming defensive coordinator just has to dial up one play to give WSU an improbable 9-1 season and likely a solid bowl berth. The announcer identifies the man coverage as Wyoming sends a receiver in motion. They remind everyone that this is the end of the year for the Cowboys. And instead of calling another 4 verts, this time the slot jams the tight end's assigned defender, giving him just enough space to spin into the end zone for the go-ahead touchdown. The Cougars, who haven't scored since early in the second quarter, are in disbelief. For the 3rd straight week, they've had a greater than 89% chance of victory with about 3.5 minutes remaining. And yet they are once again about to lose to a team they closed as double-digit favorites against. 3 plays and a Mateer interception later, it's over. After 3 straight collapses, the Reddit postgame thread does not disappoint. Hey, there's that word we just learned about. Coaching against your former school sometimes has consequences. Mike New taught us that lesson when he was promptly fired. For DivKid, though, he received more of a Lane Kiffin treatment. Despite the season ending in agonizing fashion and Mateer becoming the next WSU QB coined a top transfer, Jakey D accepts a role filling the vacancy at Wake Forest. He wasn't fired or demoted or tarmacked. He was able to leave on his own. following the path set by Cam Ward going to a cross-country ACC team. It may be a bit unfair picking at this thread, but as we welcome Dicker to Wake, the attitude of Washington State fans is more apathy than anger. This series of comments by Cougars fans lays out what they've been through, and ultimately their pain is why I couldn't bring myself to rank this game higher. At the end of the day, what's happened to WSU over the past 10 years is what all college football fans fear for their team. Unless you root for a modern-day blue blood, a team impervious to the volatile atmosphere, this is a reality that could befall every fan. A collapse so massive, so earth-shattering, that it can rob you of your ability to engage with a sport altogether. Actions so out of your control, out of the hands of even those officials on campus, that effectively end your ability to use the sport as an escape. Their university, at the heart of Pullman, banished to the island of mid-major purgatory. Speaking of islands and mid-majors, rivalries exist because of familiarity. It's what makes hating your neighbor more palpable than hating the CEO of a company. You might know of the alleged atrocities that CEO has committed, resulting in thousands of deaths, but your neighbor, let's call him Greg, supporting the other political party or the other local sports team, lends itself to a more visceral animosity. For Hawaii and Fresno State, the rivalry was born by being stuck together, not by being literally next door, but shared experiences. Maybe a better analogy would have been your annoying coworker who lives in the town over, but for whatever reason you can't avoid running into him. Rarely grand enough for either program to garner much national attention, they're just big enough to shake up things sometimes. Hawaii exists on a literal island, the most isolated program in the country. Fresno State exists on a figurative island, sandwiched in the San Joaquin Valley between the Bay and Los Angeles. They represent a different type of Californian, more akin to Nate and Nick Diaz from Stockton, or whatever comes out of Bakersfield other than Korn and the Carr brothers.
Fuck you, Bakersfield!
Before we dive into the choke, this video by Empire contains a lot of background on this rivalry, and was a huge resource in being able to complete this section. Also, most of the rivalry-inducing moments are merely alleged, and have little evidence to back them up. It's mainly rumors, even if these schools and their fans treat them as indisputable facts. The game is sometimes informally referred to as the Golden Screwdriver, a term coined by none other than our favorite needle-averse coach, Nick Rolovich, in 2016. But the routine matchup between two schools of similar prestige was bound to spill over into some animosity. The two have mirrored each other since 1992 when Fresno State joined the WAC. In their first year together, Hawaii would win the initial conference meeting in a 47-45 shootout that resulted in these schools being crowned co-champions. They would trade blows throughout the 90s until they became a little too familiar with each other in 2001. Quarterback Nick Rolovich, can't escape this guy, he's like a virus, would lead the Rainbow Warriors to a 38-34 victory after being down 27-13. The loss would cost the Bulldogs a conference title despite beating LA Tech head-to-head and playing a much harder schedule. That second conference loss would ruin Fresno's best chances of winning another WAC title before the conference dissolved in 2012. Weird events leading up to the game, including Aloha Airlines and a lost playbook, along with a missing police escort, led to some shit-talking before the 2002 matchup. Legendary quarterback Timmy Chang would lead another insane comeback in this rendition of the game, where we would ultimately earn our Golden Screwdriver namesake. After the win, head coach June Jones would assert that a flying screwdriver nearly hit his head on the sidelines, thus giving us the Screwdriver rivalry, even if it wasn't officially coined until 2016. The rumor mill would churn following subsequent matchups with claims of poor hospitality from the hosts of either school. See? Just like how it goes with that annoying neighbor. It's mostly rumors, but enough to keep the animosity front and center. Hawaii would fall off after the departure of their longtime head coach Jones, but that wouldn't stop them from sticking it to Fresno a few times before these co-workers would switch to the Mountain West. Since then, Fresno has more or less taken over the rivalry, winning 9 of the last 12. However, Hawaii always seems to win when it's most inconvenient for the Bulldogs. In 2021, Hawaii eked out a 27-24 victory after a wide-open receiver popped the ball into the air for an easy interception in the red zone to take down an 18th-ranked Fresno team. Fresno would get their revenge in 2022, but in 2023, conference realignment would ultimately take another rivalry game hostage as the Mountain West opted against divisions to split the conference. This resulted in the teams avoiding each other for the first time in 32 years. Fortunately, 2024 would see them pitted against each other once again. However, shortly into this season, Fresno State would announce their departure from the Mountain West, answering the call to attempt a Pac-12 revitalization. They will leave with a number of other Mountain West teams, but Hawaii will not be one of them, signing an agreement to stay in their current conference until 2032. That makes their November 2024 matchup the last time the teams will play in Valley Children's Stadium as conference rivals. With only a home-and-home remaining, it's unlikely either of these matchups will exceed the stakes of their games throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Coming into the November matchup, both teams have had underwhelming seasons. They're essentially just fighting for bowl eligibility at this point. Hawaii is coached by their former quarterback Timmy Chang, while Fresno is coached by their former linebacker Tim Skipper in his first year. He took over for Jeff Tedford, who also played quarterback for the Bulldogs. His predecessor, Kalen DeBoer, did not play at Fresno State, but that hasn't slowed his career down. Regardless, both teams like to keep it in the family, backing head coaches that played for their university in the past. Remember, it was Dr. Rolovich that coined this rivalry during his tenure back in 2016. Fresno comes into the game as 13.5-point favorites. I would guess Hawaii's 3-5 record and performances on the road play the biggest role in this. A lot of teams struggle on the road. I mean, DeBoer's vaunted Crimson Tide lost at Vanderbilt and Oklahoma this same season. It happens. Nonetheless, the first half is pretty mundane as the teams trade extremely lengthy opening drive touchdowns before the defenses get a chance to settle in. Fresno scores a second, but in the most notable moment of the opening 30 minutes, their PAT is blocked by Hawaii. The teams exchange 7 punts before anything important happens again, when after a 6.5-minute, 12-play, 64-yard drive by Hawaii is ended with a tipped ball being intercepted and returned for a score to extend the Bulldog advantage to 13. The play looked eerily similar to the interception in 2021, and in response our win probability goes all the way to 95.5% for Fresno State. The Bows settle in to try and make a game of it. They go for it on 4th down twice, which results in a very deserving targeting call extending the drive after a would-be turnover on downs. They then capitalize as Nick Senecal hauls in a 9-yard touchdown to bring the game within 6. Fresno State commits the quintessential comeback prevention flaw of going 3 and out immediately after their opponent gets momentum. Hawaii gets the ball to the Fresno 36 after eating up 5 minutes of the final quarter, and coming out of the 2-minute timeout look to convert a crucial 3rd and 5 with top receiver Senecal, but the junior from Canada fumbles the ball, giving the Dogs possession with under 2 to play. The reactions from both the Hawaii and Fresno State players represent that this is more than just a conference game to them. The only beacon of hope for the Bows is that, despite the deficit, they've managed to save all their timeouts. Head coach Timmy Chang may not have a great record, but I have to commend the clock management here. The once 96.9% chance to win had crept back into the 70s, but now returns to its rightful place at 94.9 with Fresno beginning their drive. A single first down should effectively end the game, but since Hawaii has 3 timeouts, the Bulldogs should probably keep their foot on the gas. Unfortunately, just like Nate Diaz in a title fight, with an opportunity to deliver the knockout blow, they'd rather point and stare than surely end the battle victorious. The ensuing punt doesn't even cross the 50. Fresno State has had 5 offensive series this half, 4 of them resulting in 3 and outs, and in totality have netted just 33 yards on 19 plays. I understand a lot of changes in a program after 2 years, especially now, but the last time Hawaii visited the Valley, they dropped 48 unanswered points on the Bows en route to that 55-13 win. With 90 seconds remaining and Hawaii now lacking any timeouts, at the very least the clock is Fresno State's friend. Field position withstanding, Hawaii hasn't been able to move the ball downfield quickly all game. They've had 5 drives today that didn't result in the punt. Those 5 drives have been about 5.5 minutes in length on average, and that's been the trend all year. Looking at every Hawaii drive against FBS competition coming into this game, the most noticeable trend is how much time it takes for them to score or get into scoring position. This is likely part of their offensive scheme. Control time of possession, score points, win the game. That said, it hasn't been some magic slipper resulting in wins. They're still 3 and 5. Now, down 6 with the clock approaching midnight, just getting points won't save this rainbow from turning into a pumpkin. They need a touchdown. Hawaii's average touchdown drive this season has taken about 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Their quickest touchdown to date was last week, a 62-second drive that started on the Nevada 28. Not exactly marching down the field. That a massive outlier as their next quickest touchdown drive took 2 minutes and 50 seconds off the clock. This team simply isn't built for scoring quick. Even their 2 quickest scoring drives really weren't all that fast. We're 67% of the way through the season, and they haven't had a single offensive score that took less than a minute off the clock, and that's including their game against FCS opponent Northern Iowa. This team is not built to score quickly. They don't have experience scoring quick. It's simply not their forte. Scoring on the previous drive would have been much more their speed prior to the fumble. Fresno State's win probability is around the 80% mark. But with this knowledge, in conjunction with the fact that we're in Fresno, over 41,000 strong at full throat, it begs for an even lower probability in Hawaii's favor. So of course, going 47 yards in 10 plays to score with only 15 seconds remaining is exactly what they do. The Canadian redeems himself as Nick Senecal hauls in the game winner, stunning the home crowd.
This will be the best plane ride in 3 years for Timmy Chang and the Warriors if they can finish this game up.
And finish the game they will. The pride of the Valley was never going to get into field goal range in 15 seconds, not after the half they've had.
I'm going straight to Home Depot to get that screwdriver and give it to Timmy Chang. They've won the screwdriver trophy.
And this would really be the dagger for the Bulldogs season. They'd go on to win just one more game, which earned them a spot in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, in which they'd miss a 35-yard game winner as part of a 28-20 double overtime heartbreaker. If you find it weird that half of our chokes have come out west, I'd have to concur. Something is weird in this region, from Berkeley to Boulder to Pullman and the Valley. It'd honestly be naive to think that we're leaving the Golden State at this point. Less than 200 miles north of Fresno sits Palo Alto, a city nestled in a much different valley. Stanford, the most prestigious university in Silicon Valley, prides itself on having some of the hardest admissions requirements in the country, even alongside the Ivy Leagues. One of the major differences between Stanford and the Ivy League schools is the quality and premiership of the football program. While Harvard and Yale claim national titles from before the forward pass was commonplace, they now compete in the Ivy League Conference and, starting in 2025, will compete in the FCS playoffs as opposed to vying for a bid to win the Dr. Pepper National Championship. Stanford, on the other hand, isn't even a full decade removed from winning a Power 5 conference and nearly earning a bid into the aforementioned playoff. Anybody that was paying attention to the sport 10 years ago remembers Stanford as a blossoming powerhouse. Fast forward to today, and they have become something of a bottom feeder. The major changes in the sport have not been friendly to this program. When they welcome in Louisville on November 16th, they find themselves as 20-point underdogs, which isn't remotely surprising considering their abysmal record, or Louisville's recent surge under second-year head coach Jeff Brom, who took over for our old pal Scott Satterfield. The Cardinals come out of the gate slow, but bring the game back towards expectations by finishing the half up 21-13. Honestly, we can just fast forward to around the 10-minute mark of the fourth quarter. As with most things Stanford football lately, we're not missing out on much. This is still the same team that lost to the FCS school they poached their head coach from after all. $600,000 well spent if you ask me. Louisville extends their lead to 14 with under 10 to play, and their win probability is hovering around 95%. Not a huge jump since it's been 85% or greater since the half. Naturally, they allow a huge play almost immediately that sees the trees get into the red zone. For whatever reason, Stanford calls timeout after the big play, which doesn't make sense to me as a team down by 2 touchdowns should probably be a little bit more careful with those. Louisville forces 4th and goal but leaves a man wide open in the back of the end zone as a desperate Stanford prayer is answered. The attendance here today claims that 18,685 people showed up for the game, only about 37% of Stanford Stadium's capacity. As the shots from around the venue suggest, it's safe to assume that number is drastically lower now. Apparently, if a tree falls in Palo Alto, no one wants to be around to hear it. Jokes aside, there is something pretty sad about these pictures, knowing that at one point this place was packed over capacity. Now, not even a decade after becoming the next big thing, this is what we see. It's like that app on your phone that you forgot about. Something that parallels life in Silicon Valley. So many next big things that get lost in the forest of big tech. Speaking of forgotten things, it's as if Scott Satterfield's decision-making has somehow taken Jeff Brom hostage. True freshman running back Duke Watson has 11 carries for 117 yards and 3 touchdowns, 60% of the team's points. The broadcast does an entire cutscene discussing how much of a monster Watson has been, leading into the Bills' drive.
Duke Watson has filled in admirably for Isaac Brown, true freshman to true freshman. Brown hurt earlier. Watson has filled in 3 scores for Duke Watson. Watson is the first true freshman running back with 100 yards plus 3 touchdowns in a game in school history.
And yet, we get to watch Brom forget about his running back having a breakout day. The win probability was virtually unfazed by the fact that Stanford scored, but it couldn't account for this. It was Duke that got them to 2nd and 5, so of course they threw 4 straight passes before ultimately having to punt the ball away. Could really use Sam Acho right now. Stanford works their way down the field to get inside the 40 by the 2-minute timeout. Still unfazed, our win probability hangs at 90% for the Cards. The Trees seem to have no urgency as they are content not using their timeouts and turning big amounts of time off the clock between plays. They even attempt a surprise draw on 3rd and 3 that's stuffed just a yard short. Timeout Stanford as 4th and 1 looms. One stop and Louisville escapes and just becomes another team that struggled a bit after having to travel cross country. Unfortunately for them, distance traveled does not qualify as an exemption. Stanford puts in their backup QB and comes out in a jumbo set. In response, Louisville has 11 players in frame or around the box, electing for no over-the-top help. It's the type of alignment you'd expect from a team that is either losing and selling out to stop the run, or winning by a comfortable margin and trying to get out of the game. Stanford needs a touchdown, and while stuffing them on this 4th down would help win the game, it's not paramount. As much as I don't want to bury a coach for a decision I may not fully understand, I really can't defend this one. So I'm super appreciative that Braun burns a timeout here in order to adjust his lineup. Sorry for being so presumptuous, that's real gamesmanship. Except, coming out of the timeout, both teams have barely adjusted their formations. Stanford still in a jumbo set with their backup QB, and Louisville, I mean, it looks like barely anything changed, but maybe it's a little bit more conservative? No, it's not. The backup quarterback that hasn't attempted a pass all game somehow heaves a prayer while being mauled, and with no safety coverage, the receiver comes down with it in the end zone. 1-point game, 45 seconds left, and the crowd goes mild as the remaining 4,000 or so future app developers are only marginally moved by what's happening. Stanford just totally outsmarted you, Jeff. You got caught with your pants all the way down. Louisville still has 45 seconds left and 2 timeouts, so they have a chance, meaning I don't agree with this announcer saying that Stanford should go for 2 here.
If I was Stanford, I would try to end this thing right here, George, and I would be going for 2.
There is still plenty of time for Louisville to respond. Why force them to be aggressive by taking the lead, or even worse, capping off this epic comeback by falling just 1 point short? My opinion matters here, and I'm of the camp that you would only go for 2 and the win if the chances of your opponent getting into field goal range are virtually impossible. There is no need to incentivize desperation on their end unless you are extremely confident the game will end with that score. Obviously, the geniuses at Stanford kicked the extra point, validating my vanity, and shout out Emmett Mosley V with 12 receptions for 168 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's not every day you see a guy exceed his entire team's combined production, so hats off to another true freshman. Louisville starts the drive hot, and just like that, they're at midfield with the clock stopped at 32. Their kicker's long is a 56, so a few more yards and they escape the raucous road environment with a very expected victory. They get up to the 45 with 19 seconds and a timeout to spare, so they just need about 5 more yards to have a shot at it. The first deep shot is missed, drag route not executed, and this announcer is so painfully desperate to be wrong, he suggests Louisville punt it away, but then agrees with them being aggressive when they come out to go for it on 4th and 10.
I think you have to think punting the ball away. I like them being aggressive right now.
In fairness, Stanford now has just 5 seconds to try and turn this into points. So most of the time this would be an easy stop and on to overtime we go. Lucky you, you're getting an exemption, and that's almost guaranteed until... there it is. The last thing you can do is get an unsportsmanlike call at this juncture. Is it a little soft? Sure, I'll give you that, but you're pushing a guy right in front of an official. Stanford kicker Emmett Kenny is in his first season back after breaking his hip. He missed the previous 2 years. He does have a long of 51 under his belt, but this is going to be a 57, and that's really pushing it. It is senior night though, so he really has a chance to be a hero. And while this choke has been pretty frustrating, what really takes it over the top isn't forcing passes while setting your red hot back, or giving up a deep touchdown on 4th and 1, or even the unnecessary roughness to allow this 57-yard whopper. It comes down to this. And I'm trying to avoid dragging any kids here. This is supposed to be more about coaches, but I can't imagine how awful it would feel to fly home after being this guy or the guy that got the personal foul, because obviously the hip holds up and Kenny hits his career long on senior night as the ball barely travels far enough to clear the uprights, needing every bit of those penalty yards. Cue the SpongeBob meme.
That's my ice cream cone.
Great! Now let him have it!
You can have it.
According to Sports Reference's database, 302 schools or organizations have competed at the highest level of Division I football for at least a single game. Of those schools, 89 of them have completed at least 750 matches. Of those 89 schools, only 5 of them have an all-time win percentage below 420. Of these 5 schools, Just 3, a special 3, have spent less than 10 weeks ranked by the Associated Press. These 3 schools represent some of the worst football programs that have graced college football. There have been plenty of bad teams, a lot of them recognizing that maybe they aren't very good and relegating themselves to the FCS level or worse. Not these 3. Despite being eternally woeful, they remain at the highest level, unjaded by their past failures, rarely even willing to give their fans a beacon of hope. And the craziest thing in all of this is that 2 of these schools are in the same state. The other one, UTEP, might as well be in New Mexico too. Geographically, it's closer to both the New Mexico universities than any of the other 12 active D1 FBS Texas universities. These 3 schools, all representing cities that dot the Rio Grande, represent a river of suck. How can a state so close to Texas, where football is as much a religion as it is a sport, be so bad at it? It's like the land is radioactive. Compared to the rest of the country, it's alien. The only reason the New Mexico Lobos' win percentage is somewhat higher than its counterparts to the south is due to the fact it's inflated by beating up on the other 2 teams along this river. If you take away their wins against NMSU and UTEP, their already abysmal all-time win percentage of .418 falls to .377. That is astounding. 25% of their wins, all time, have come against these 2 programs. It's no wonder they've never found themselves ranked to end a year. They're a bully that beats up on the other 2 losers in the Dollar General parking lot. Remember when they somehow beat number 19 Washington State? That was their first ranked win in 21 years. Their Rio Grande counterparts are no better in that regard, which is somewhat expected. It's not like they play ranked opponents all that often. But even then, I like to think the worst teams sometimes get those fun upsets. It's almost inevitable, but not along this river of suck. Not in this desert of football ineptitude. When you take away their games against each other, they all still suck. The one thing UTEP and NMSU have on their rivals to the north, despite the Lobos competing at the highest level for 93 years, they have never, not once, not even by accident, been ranked in the AP Top 25. While NMSU and UTEP may not have much time there either, they have each spent at least 5 weeks in their history having a number next to their name. Not the Lobos. Never for the Lobos. They are truly the lone wolf in the desert of suck. And yet no matter what, people still show up. With a 5-year average attendance of 15,923, Lobo fans, masochists surely, attend games every fall, in hopes the near century of torture finally ends. Their coaches, however, recognize no such loyalty. Even their greatest hires often just use the program as a stepping stone to reach greater heights. Their winningest coach, Rocky Long, often revered by the Lobo fanbase, was an alumni of the university. After 10 years leading the Lobos to a 65-69 record, he too would step down in favor of a coordinator position at SDSU. Shortly after, he would become the head coach there and lead the Aztecs to 3 Mountain West Conference titles. Not even one of their own could be convinced to stick around and bring the Lobos to the next level. Rocky left his alma mater just to win a trio of championships in 5 years, competing in the same conference he had been in with the Lobos. Before Rocky, Dennis Francione had decent success bringing the program up, but after a 9-win 1997, he was poached by TCU. Going back further through their middling coaches, you have Mike Shepard's 9-50 run. He took over for an average Joe Lee Dunn, who succeeded Joe Morrison. Morrison here is responsible for the lone 10-win season in Lobo history. Predictably, he was immediately poached by South Carolina, where he'd introduce Black Magic and lead them to their best season in school history to that point. And we can go all the way back to the pre-modern era where, while there were some winning seasons, they gave us more via exciting and hysterical names like Dudley DeGroot, Ted Shipke, and Dick Clawson. But if you were to ask who was the worst coach in New Mexico history, the worst of the worst, the Tank Commander Supreme, that honor would actually belong to current Maryland head coach Mike Locksley. He took over for Rocky Long, tough shoes to fill, sure, but in 2.5 seasons as head coach, he would record just 2 wins. He was fired amidst his 3rd season after a 48-45 loss against, at the time, FCS squad Sam Houston. This is a tough place to be fired from, so he enrolled in Saban's boot camp from earlier. Fast forward to today, and after Danny Gonzalez, not the YouTuber but the football coach, resigned, Bronco Mendenhall would be given the reins. Mendenhall had resigned from UVA following the 2021 season and had not worked since. It's week 0, August 24th, 2024. 17,314 fans will descend upon University Stadium. Their Lobos are hosting an FCS opponent in Montana State. Rabid college football fans coming off of a 7-month fast, just saw Georgia Tech upset FSU, and crave more. This makes it one of the lone times all season that New Mexico will have the attention of a national audience. Broncos defense is hungry like the wolf, not 5 minutes into the game forcing a scoop and score to take a quick 7-0 lead. It is their first fumble recovery touchdown since 2021, off to a good start. The defense forces a punt, and the QB Dampier shows off his arm with a 54-yard dot that was all air yards. The offense can't stay in rhythm though, and the wind dies down just long enough to get off a 45-yard field goal with ease. Another Bobcat drive ends in a turnover on downs, and after just entering the second quarter, the Lobos take a 17-0 lead. Montana State is a very run-first, run-dependent team. They have their identity and they like to stick to it. Being down 3 scores early in the game is less than ideal. At least, that's what the broadcast wants you to believe. Perhaps they're in preseason form too, need to shake the rust off. Montana State throws for a touchdown and after a quick UNM 3-and-out, asks why not another. That 3-score lead has all but been erased and it's not even halftime. But as we remember from our visit to Cincinnati, games can be heavily influenced going into and coming out of halftime. The Lobos dink and dunk their way down the field and have been implementing this tortoiseshell formation that has the Bobcats on their heels as a designed QB run catches everyone sleeping when Dampier scampers for a 24-yard score. What's better than going into half with a 24-14 lead against a team that insists on running the ball? Forcing a scoop and score to extend that lead back to 17. The Bobcats get the ball back and march down the field, again electing to go forward on 4th down, and get stuffed after burning another 5 minutes of game time. New Mexico responds with their own lengthy drive into field goal range, and this end-zone camera shows just how dramatically those wind gusts have picked up inside the stadium as an opportunity to extend the lead to 20 is gone with the wind. With the ball but down 3 scores as the third quarter becomes the fourth, Montana State sticks to their script by continuing to run the ball. The 10-play drive only has a single pass thrown as the Bobcats cut the lead to 10. They are unfazed by the clock and, in fairness, they have every reason to be confident. They're averaging over 7 yards per carry after more than 30 attempts. With a long of just 34, it's not like that sample is wildly skewed by a random 93-yarder. They're also dealing with absurd wind that would make throwing nearly impossible for any team. The broadcast shows shots from around the stadium, and play is temporarily delayed to remove debris from the field. Some officials are no longer wearing their hats to prevent them from being blown away in the vortex. When the Lobos get back into field goal range, the goalposts moving create their own version of a stadium pulse, and yet another kick misses the mark. Montana State continues to run the ball successfully, but after getting stuffed for 2 straight, elect to pass on 4th down with 6 minutes remaining, and the announcers have pretty much written this game off. Our win probability has jumped to 98.5%, the highest it's been all game. The announcers laud the young New Mexico QB before his pass goes right through the hands of UNM's top receiver. A drive-extending catch here very likely would have put the game out of reach. But this is the desert. These are the Lobos. They are proof that life isn't fair. Even with the coffin corner punt pinning the Bobcats at their own 7, it takes one play. Untouched, unbelievable. Despite 2 of their drives ending in defensive touchdowns, Montana State had averaged over 3 minutes per possession until now. With 5 to play, the only way the Lobos could choke is by allowing the run-first team to score quick. But that's what happens. 93 yards and a cloud of dust. Win probability still believes in our Lobos though. With the conditions, it'll be hard for anyone to make a field goal. So even though it'd be nice to have that cushion, a few first downs should be enough. Surprisingly, the Lobos don't go 3-and-out. They go back to their shell formation and first down. Just a few more and this new era has momentum. On 3rd and 6, another pass is simply dropped. It could have been a little bit more in front, but with 2 hands on it, hauling that in is a must. Instead, the ball is punted away and MSU starts their drive at the New Mexico 11. It'll be hard to run for an entire drive with no way to stop the clock, so they test the Lobos secondary. It's asleep. Like a desert night, they've gone cold. They've only been tested 6 times this half, and that allows MSU to blow a coverage wide open and get the ball to the Lobos 30 with 1:20 to go. Getting inside the red zone with over 60 seconds, the Bobcats' mission changes from tying to winning. So naturally on 1st and goal with just 15 seconds to go, they run the ball, take the lead, game over. It's not surprising. It doesn't come as some huge shock. It's nothing more than what we're here for, a massive choke. Sure, they were outgained by over 200 total yards and had 10 minutes less time of possession, but this game was theirs for the taking. Maybe as a viewer this doesn't seem as bad as some of the other items we've seen on this list. Maybe the Lobos should get an exemption for historical purposes. Maybe you're just getting numb. But major collapses take more than just a few catastrophic plays. It's a missed kick here, and again. A drop pass there, and again. falling for a fake, a blown coverage. These are mostly unforced errors. It didn't take a sole superhuman performance by anyone on MSU to rewrite history. FS1 wants to call them missed opportunities, but we all know what they are. Along the Rio Grande, of all the natural dangers, starvation, isolation, dehydration, the wildlife, nothing is more dangerous than the expectation that things will change. While the rest of the football world cycles, things here stay the same. The Lobos would actually have a pretty admirable season by their standards. They started 0-4 but went 5-3 down the stretch to finish better than expected in the Mountain West. They picked up a win against NMSU along with that ranked win against the Cougs, but after just one season in Albuquerque, Bronco Mendenhall would leave, taking over the job at Utah State, a team that UNM beat in October. So too would go their blossoming young QB, top 2 leading receivers, top running back. Actually 35 of their scholarship athletes entered the portal. A complete mass exodus. And while some would stay following the hiring of Idaho coach Jason Eck, we all know, there is no loyalty, there is no rebuilding. This is just life along the Rio Grande. Heading back down the Big River to El Paso awaits another unfortunate tale. The miners aren't the focus of an in-game joke or anything, instead just another example of life out here being completely unfair. We already discussed UTEP's less than fruitful past, but remember a few years ago when seemingly out of nowhere you were hearing about UTSA putting together that must mean Texas San Antonio? Maybe you paused because it's a team you're not familiar with, despite all of the time you've spent watching college ball and taking in the sport. Where did they come from? It's not your fault. I mean, it's never your fault, but how was your memory supposed to recall a team that has only played the sport for 13 years? It wasn't until 2006 that the idea of a UTSA football team came about. It's possible that some of the motivation was due to the fact the city built the Alamo Dome in 1993 during an effort to lure an NFL team to the area. After losing out on the prospect of a pro football team to cities like Charlotte, Jacksonville, Baltimore, and Houston, they needed to pivot in order to justify the stadium's existence. That's actually complete conjecture on my part. UTSA surveyed students and gained the necessary approvals, determining that a football team would be feasible. While I couldn't find as much as I'd like about the true politics that occurred to bring this about, this Texas university was finally going to get its chance on the gridiron. They were a complete startup program, hiring former national champion winning Miami head coach Larry Coker in 2009. Naturally, they had no equipment reserves, so Coker bought a helmet and jersey from the local Walmart that he would parade around as proof the football team was real. I like to imagine Larry sitting outside an H-E-B in the Texas sun, displaying the helmet and jersey on a folding plastic table like it's evidence of Bigfoot's existence, trying to raise money like a Girl Scout with no Thin Mints or Samoas. So how is UTEP involved in this at all? Well, the newly appointed UTSA equipment manager, Mike Villa, graduated from UTEP. He reached out to the minors program asking if it was possible to get some practice gear donated, and UTEP generously sent 100 sets of pads to the newly founded program. While other Texas universities would follow UTEP's lead in helping the fledgling program, it started with the one farthest away on the opposite side of the massive state. With a hodgepodge of gear from different corners of Texas, they probably looked more like the prisoners in The Longest Yard than an actual D1 college football program. They even practiced at a local high school instead of their own facilities while their own was under construction. If you're also surprised that they're Division I right off the rip, me too. No need to play D2 or D3 and work their way into the bigs. They came into the picture while the WAC was reeling after losing Boise, Fresno, and Hawaii. The WAC came through with an offer and UTSA accepted. Despite never playing an organized game of NCAA-sanctioned ball, they were set to be D1 FBS. All it would take is one season as an FBS independent startup and a transitional year. That 2011 season would see them go 4-6, setting a new FBS startup record for average attendance with over 35,000. In 2012, they went 8-4 as a transitional member to the WAC. With that conference season to exist, the young program would be forced into the CUSA, the same conference UTEP had competed in since 2005. After their first meeting, UTSA would leave El Paso with a 32-13 victory. Whether or not they practiced that week in the same pads donated by UTEP just a few years earlier is undocumented. The schools would trade wins through 2016 with the conclusion of a 5-overtime thriller that the Miners won 52-49. The thing about mines is that sometimes they dry up and the shafts are abandoned. Because despite meeting 6 more times since then, it's been all Roadrunners, and with the exception of 2022, it's usually not even close. A school they helped hatch has completely surpassed them, and not just head-to-head. So UTEP has been in CUSA since 2005, right? Well, they've never won the conference. UTSA has accomplished that feat twice, in 2021 and 2022, in such convincing manner that they would leave the lowly CUSA for an upgrade to the American Athletic Conference. Fast forward to 2024, and the Roadrunners seem to have one bizarre kryptonite: playing on the road, seemingly the antithesis of their namesake. The 4 games they've played outside the Alamo Dome so far have all ended in defeat, getting shelled by Texas State and Texas, while also dropping conference games at ECU and Rice, a game they had an 88% chance to win with just 9 seconds remaining before this happened.
Snap. Warner looking for the end zone. Touchdown!
But that's all been before their trip to Tulsa today. By halftime, the Roadrunners have achieved the incredible feat of a 99.6% win probability just 30 minutes into the game after generating a 35-7 lead. Their defense has allowed just 125 yards on 10 Kane drives, over half of which came on that lone scoring drive. And that Tulsa offense seems to be in relative disarray. Full disclosure, Kevin Wilson will be fired at the end of the season. Tulsa is going in a different direction and wants to recoup the energy that got them to the American Conference in the first place. Coming into the game hosting UTSA, they've lost 3 straight, including blowouts to UNT and Army, as well as a double-digit loss to Temple, of all teams. In all of those games, QB Kirk Francis has been given the start. He's a preferred walk-on from right here in Tulsa. Unfortunately, that means 3-star transfer Cooper Legas from Utah State has spent most of his senior year on the bench. He's seen some action, but mostly in garbage time when these losses are all but guaranteed. Some of the time he'll come in for a drive, and then Wilson will go right back to Francis, despite the routinely ugly performances. But today, after the deficit reached 20, Legas has been given the nod, and it seems he'll get to play out the rest of the game at this point, once again getting snaps after the game is almost completely out of reach. On the other side of the ball, UTSA has been carving up the Tulsa defense in a variety of ways. It doesn't seem like there is one quick solution to stop the bleeding. The teams trade punts, and then UTSA allows a scoop and score to go the other direction, and after another punt, Tulsa responds with a quick field goal to make the game 35-17. Our win probability has wavered a little, but UTSA answers, going 75 yards in 7 plays to go back up 42-17. A 25-point lead with the fourth quarter on the horizon, this lead really should be insurmountable. I mean, sure, we just watched New Mexico blow a 17-point lead, but this is different. These are conference opponents, and UTSA closed as a 9.5-point favorite. With Tulsa losing their last 3 games all by double digits, this is par for the course. The stadium that welcomed 17,000 attendees looks mostly empty by now. Stadium polls won't be playing a role. Of course, that would assume you don't let Tulsa score in 2 plays, only taking 40 seconds off the clock. It would further assume you wouldn't dream to punt the ball away again, and then shortly into the fourth quarter turn that lead into just 11 points. Scratch that, you find yourself offsides on the PAT, so now Tulsa goes for 2, and you might as well make that deficit an even 10. Faith craters as our win probability falls to just 88%, the lowest it's been since the first quarter. It'd be even weirder to go 3 and out right after that, gaining 0 yards and wasting just 47 seconds. UTSA doesn't think so. Somebody wakes up and the defense finally forces a stop after 3 straight scoring drives. That motivation seems to inspire the offense too. They go back to the air and find themselves inside the Tulsa red zone during a suffocating 14-play, 6-minute drive. This was what they needed all half. Just 1 or 2 of these, grab some points, get back to San Antonio ready to party. Unfortunately, the coach that was so aggressive in the opening half has grown timid, electing to run twice inside the red zone instead of relying on the passing attack to try for 7. They make their kick though, and with barely over 5 to play and a 13-point lead, the illustrious 99.9% win probability graces the Roadrunners. The defense forces a 2nd and 21, only to gift it right back by targeting the QB. Luckily enough, they force a 4th and 5 shortly after. Tulsa is abysmal on 4th down this season, converting just 4 of their 15 attempts to this point. That's good for 129th in FBS, making them nearly dead last. Of course, that was with a different QB under center. The experienced senior goes over the top, and instead of ending the game with a turnover on downs, the lead shrinks to 6. The offense has scored 38 points today. The last time they were on the field, they burned 6 minutes off the clock. This time, 24 seconds, 3 and out, back below 90% we go. A monster 63-yard punt backs Tulsa up to their own end zone and ensures the 2-minute timeout won't be much more than a formality. UTSA gets through to force a fumble, but sometimes luck just isn't on your side. It lands in the hands of a Tulsa lineman, and even after he drops it, is able to pick up just enough of a cushion to prevent the Canes from being totally backed up. Win probability check, 99.4. Tulsa uses one of their last 2 timeouts and victory is palpable. But much like Montana State, Tulsa gets into UTSA territory with well over a minute to go. Inside the 4 with a minute left. Now they need to worry about scoring too quickly.
Of course you want to score a touchdown, but you don't want to leave that much time on the clock.
That's essentially validated when UTSA gets to the 50 in one play. The Roadrunners kicker hit a 52-yarder just a few weeks ago. They really only need about 15 yards to give themselves a chance to escape what should have been a blowout with a close win. 4 straight incompletions later, that chance will never come. But you knew that. The game ends with Tulsa going on a run of 28-3. UTSA will beat a 7-1 Memphis team a week later at the Alamodome, further cementing that this really is a road issue. They won't win a single road game all year unless you count their bowl game. Not every choke needs a crazy backstory or wild repercussions. Jeff Traylor will keep his job. As we know, Kevin Wilson will not. He'll stick with the senior QB for the remainder of the season, but outside this game, they won't win another all year. The biggest choke of the season takes us to Statesboro, Georgia, where the commentary really sets the stage.
This is why we call it the Fun Belt. It was not a game until it was.
By the end of the game, you will understand exactly why this cataclysmic choke was more than deserving of the worst choke of the year title, one that would register on a 10-year retroactive review. It will have repercussions that cause mayhem and confusion for the rest of the landscape, a dystopian epic that encapsulates everything right and wrong with college football. It happened on one of the most chaotic days of the season, and you probably missed it if, like me, you were caught up in the drama surrounding the Power 4 games. There are 10.5 minutes left. Somehow, there will be 10 more possessions in this game. Further, the remaining ESPN coverage of this game will take over an hour, and that is not including commercials. The game doesn't go to overtime. It doesn't magically become a shootout. It wasn't written that way. Due to the fact the win probability graph is nearly out of space to represent what is about to happen, we're going to need something a little more viewer-friendly.
Marshall, man, they've been backed up all night. It hasn't mattered.
And they hadn't struggled to this point, but a second down miscommunication by Stone Earl results in intentional grounding in the end zone for everyone's second favorite scoregami block, a safety.
That's a safety. That's the exact definition of intentional grounding.
Getting the ball back doesn't do much to spur Georgia Southern's offense, but this time they elect to go for it on 4th and 10. QB JC French puts everything on the line to pick up the first down, but unfortunately gets knocked out of the game after a vicious hit that's somehow not even reviewed for targeting.
But how can this not even be looked at? That's targeting, Fozzie.
Nonetheless, Dexter Williams takes over and right away goes up top for a huge gain. Dexter transferred to the Eagles after briefly being the starter at Indiana prior to tearing his ACL. This is his first game action since November 2022. A few plays later, he hits his tight end, Jake Fromm's brother Tyler, for a score. Somehow the refs actually reverse the call, despite everyone in the building witnessing something completely different.
Still waiting for indisputable video evidence on the play that was ruled a touchdown on the field.
Fortunately, Dexter wastes no time proving that the ball often doesn't lie.
Review that!
Failed 2-point conversion that is poetically defended by the would-be ejected Marshall DB leads to the announcers honing in on the previously missed targeting call. Their demeanor suggests they are under the impression that the game is over.
From everything that we've learned about targeting, it seems like that checks many of the boxes for at least a review, Fozzie.
So when an ugly Marshall pass by Earl forces 4th down, the announcers revert to their previous discussion of the rules.
What actually is targeting right now in college football?
And perhaps, unsurprisingly to this point, their disinterest in the game is justified, as Georgia Southern quickly goes 3 and out, electing to punt this time as they're on their own too. In fairness, Marshall has had a greater than 90% chance to win this game going back to early in the third, and to this point, it hasn't dipped below 98.3 the entire fourth quarter. so maybe this ref inadvertently blowing the whistle well before he should have is purely by accident. Marshall QB Braylon Braxton's fumble leads to what should have been a touchdown for Georgia State, just giving the Eagles possession at midfield.
Inadvertent whistle.
Head coach Clay Helton is justifiably losing it.
Hey, officials, it's a thankless job. They get a lot of grief, but got to be better.
He's not talking about strawberries.
With about 4 minutes to play, down by 12, the change of possession doesn't do much to move the needle. Georgia Southern picks up this third down, but somehow the clock doesn't stop while the chains are being reset.
Clock should stop as the chains are reset, but it's running.
The broadcast is confused by this as well, and Clay Helton mustn't care about time remaining as he elects to call 3 straight runs that somehow gash the Herd defense on the way to a Bedinga touchdown. Hall of Fame name there. But after a personal foul on the PAT, Marshall recovers the second onside kick attempt at the Eagles 30. A field goal for the Herd here would create an all-important 8-point buffer, even if they have to give the ball back. So there's no way the same player, Braylon Braxton, that just coughed up the last fumble, puts the ball on the ground again. Except that he does, and after a lengthy review process, the call stands. And I can't imagine being that kid in this situation. It's rare that chokes of this magnitude fall on players, but as if you couldn't feel worse for the kid, he's in an ongoing, mid-season and to this point, mid-game, competition for the starting QB job against North Texas transfer Stone Earl, a man that arrived at Marshall merely a month before the season began. Huff's team entered the season with an obvious question mark at the position. His staff suggested it was an open competition between the transfers Earl and Braxton, who came from, ironically, Tulsa, where he'd spent the past 3 seasons. They were to compete against the mainstay on the roster, Cole Pennington. 6 games later, they still haven't decided on a full-time answer. In Week 1, everyone played against Stony Brook, but what was a 3-horse race seemed to be narrowed down to 2 in Earl against Braxton. Week 2 saw Stone play the entire game, but a 3-score loss to Virginia Tech had head coach Charles Huff left defending his personnel decisions at the podium. Week 3's drubbing by eventual national champions Ohio State saw the 3-headed experiment return. But if you're just looking at the box score, you'd probably suggest it was entirely Earl's job to lose at this point. When Earl threw 4 3 touchdowns against Western Michigan in the following game, being the only signal caller receiving reps, you'd assume the competition was totally over. Except that in the very next game, Braxton got the nod versus App State and capitalized on the opportunity with 5 total touchdowns. That was a week before today, where most people outside the Marshall locker room have no idea what's going on, or who's going to be taking snaps during their visit to Statesboro. Looking at each QB's averages at this point in the season, there seems to be an obvious clubhouse leader. But there's a caveat, not all defenses are created equally. Playing App State is not as challenging as playing Ohio State. That said, Earl did get the bulk of the snaps against Stony Brook and almost all of them against Western Michigan. In an effort to be as thorough as possible, I looked at every single drive these two quarterbacked up to this point in the season. Earl has led 41 drives, 10 of which ended in touchdowns, 5 in field goal attempts, 5 in turnovers, and the remaining 21 in punts or end of halves. Braxton has led 16 drives, 8 of which have ended in touchdowns, 2 in field goal attempts, 0 in turnovers, and the remaining 6 in punts or end of halves. In fairness, again, not all defenses are created equal. Earl playing most of the game against the Buckeyes while Braxton had an entire game against App State could skew the sample. But we're midway through the season, and including the game we're in right now, Braylon Braxton is averaging 3.38 points per drive, which is nearly double Earl's 1.83. This isn't an advanced analytic that goes into EPA or takes into account defensive efficiencies, but even if you take away Earl's drives against OSU, his points per drive only marginally increases to 1.89, and he had more drives against Stony Brook too, for what it's worth. At the very least, the 5-touchdown game against App State should at least earn Braxton a chance to operate the offense without the innate fear that he's going to be pulled after a single bad drive. But the opening drive answers the question as Stone Earl returns as the frontman. His early miscues have Marshall settling for field goals on 3 of their first 4 drives. Not all bad, but you'd like to see some of those turned into touchdowns. Looking for a spark, Huff inserts Braxton on the Herd's next possession. It starts on their own 4, but he commands a 96-yard drive for the game's opening touchdown. When Braxton again scores a touchdown on their opening drive of the second half, you'd hope the musical chairs have ended, at least for this game. Unfortunately, a single drive going 3 and out is enough for Huff, and he makes the switch back to Earl in one of the most unorthodox coaching decisions I've ever seen. Rewinding the tape, we remember it was Earl guilty of committing the ugly intentional grounding safety. Perhaps the miscommunication was due to a lack of rhythm with the receivers. Skipping forward to that third down incompletion from their next drive, it was Earl again missing the open man. Braxton was then given the nod, but these pair of fumbles may have just inadvertently ended the competition. Numbers can be misleading, but as we see Braxton on the sideline, we can only imagine what's running through his head. Getting to the human element of the sport, we talk about pressure all the time. Who is the most clutch? Things of that nature. But we've all experienced life that feels like you're walking on eggshells. Maybe a boss or parent that will lose it on you after a single mistake. The mere understanding that one goof can cost you your spot is a lot more than most can handle, especially when you've provided a mountain of evidence that you absolutely can't succeed. This isn't the pros, but it's why teams are often so patient with young quarterbacks. While Marshall reflects on the question mark that has become their biggest weakness, Williams delivers a first down for the Eagles before taking a massive sack leading into 3rd and 16 while also costing Southern their final timeout. But knowing the primary starter is likely out for the game, he's unfazed by the pressure and delivers a clutch conversion that glues to his receiver's gloves. Hurrying things up, he finds another open receiver to get inside the Marshall 40. Huff calls timeout to try and figure out how the hell his team is even in this situation after being up by 3 scores 6 minutes ago. Unfortunately for him, Dexter decides to send the remaining homecoming crowd into a frenzy with a beautiful pass and even prettier catch by the Eagles captain Burgess. Marshall stuffs another conversion attempt, and the announcers support the decision to bring Stone Earl back into the game at QB. The old adage rings true, as if you have 2 QBs, you really have none. Manifesting their own destiny, Earl throws an interception after staring down his primary target and ignoring the 2 players open in the flat. Marshall ends the game with 3 straight turnovers, 4 in their last 5 possessions if we include the safety. Twice they recovered the ball in Southern territory, yet came away with no points on both occasions. Somehow they found a way to lose the unlosable. Southern, on the other hand, just did the impossible. A sellout crowd that was once a whiteout at full strength had been reduced to just diehards. The idea of scoring 3 offensive touchdowns in 7 minutes while recovering 0 onside kicks was an idea too optimistic for most. Not to mention, they had only scored 3 total points coming into the final frame. I imagine it's something those fans will regret for a long time. One of our choke criteria was that an effort be unassisted. When I look back at this game, I can't help but think it's the polar opposite. Completely avoidable. Hindsight is 20/20, but is it that much of a stretch to suggest that Marshall wins this game if they stick with just one of the 2 QBs for the entire game? This collapse feels completely self-inflicted. Sometimes a massive choke results in people losing jobs. Other times it's a wake-up call, the humbling that's needed to take that next step.
I understand it now.
I think that's part of our human experience. You're going to make mistakes. Sometimes it'll be almost entirely your fault. But how do you choose to react? Do you crash out? Does a personal choke cause you to fall back into your vices, routinely doing the same things over and over again, but knowing that as long as you don't try, you can't be ridiculed for it? Or do you use it as motivation, the ass-kicking you needed to make the necessary changes and set things straight? Charles Huff decided to learn. After running the numbers, he realized that Braxton should be the starter. Braylon would start every remaining game for the Herd, leading them on a 6-game win streak that earned them a bid in the Sun Belt Championship game. They would go on to dismantle Louisiana and win the conference, their first conference title since 2014 in the CUSA. And less than 24 hours after raising that trophy, Huff would accept a job in southern Mississippi. Huff and Marshall had been in contract disputes for weeks and even years per some reports, and maybe the stink of this choke hadn't totally worn off. Marshall football was so gutted by transfers following Huff going down south that they now infamously had to opt out of their bowl game against Army. On October 9th, 2025, Southern Miss takes a trip to Huntington, West Virginia. Almost a year to the day from the biggest choke of 2024, Charles Huff and a bulk of the former Herd roster, including breakout quarterback Braylon Braxton, will take on Tony Gibson and the next generation of Marshall football.